So what I want to do is jump right into it. I'm going to introduce the two presenters and just a little background from me, how I learned about this. As many of you know, I'm a chaplain with the Phoenix Police Department. I went to visit a lieutenant that I'm close to who works in the patrol, in the what they call PSB, or what many of you know as IA, the Internal Affairs. And when I was speaking with him, he had a friend who came to visit as well. And we started talking about where in the department each person works. And Dave was sharing how he teaches this course. And the lieutenant who I was visiting had not taken the course either. So we both said we both need to take this course. And I had signed up to do it in May. And with the coronavirus, they canceled the in-person class. But I thought that this would be a really important presentation for all of us, especially with the climate where people think that police are not trained enough. There's the defund movement. And I thought people should really or will appreciate how much training police officers go through, not just in the sense of the physical training that's needed, but even in not abusing their positions and understanding where the police officer can go, if not, I guess the right word is, if not trained or taught, where other societies, if we don't learn from our history, what are we? So that was what turned me on to this course, the What You Do Matters, which is a course that is taught to the police departments here in Arizona. And as you'll learn from Jason and from Dave, that this course is taught really throughout the United States. I'm going to let them share the background to how the course was written, so therefore they can give the proper credits. But what I want to do is just mention their own titles. So Dave Moore is a lieutenant with the Phoenix Police Department, and Jason, I hope I'm using is it Kalish or Kalish?
Kalish.
Kalish. And Jason is a deputy county attorney with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. So we're really appreciative of your time that you're taking today to present, and I'm sure that this will be eye-opening for all of us. And I'm going to give the floor over to you.
All right, so hopefully you can see the screen that I'm sharing right now. This is a 3.5-hour course that we teach. It's offered and available to every prosecutor and law enforcement officer in Arizona. We have also been traveling across the country before the obvious circumstances to teach the course. And it's different than a lot of courses that people take. I know as an attorney, I have to take a certain number of continuing legal education hours every year. And usually it's a PowerPoint and just lessons about how the law is changing and how we're supposed to apply case law and statutes and that sort of thing. This course is more designed to be a conversation among the students. And so we don't even refer to ourselves as teachers. We refer to ourselves as facilitators because we want to facilitate the discussion, and we really want to spend 3.5 hours just talking as a group and having the people come to some lessons that they can take from the history that we share with them. And so what Dave and I are going to do for the next half hour is go through the slides that we showed during the training and just give a little bit of a background as to why we're showing them and what discussion we hope to get through those slides until we get to the end and kind of to wrap up on that. And I think Dave is going to lead you through a small discussion on one of the pictures. So we start out by giving a history of how the program has evolved. And it started with the chief of police for the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C., just simply being invited to tour the Holocaust Museum. And when he went through it, he ended up asking a question because he saw so many pictures of police officers on the walls. He asked the question, why didn't police officers stop the Holocaust? They're supposed to protect the people in their communities. And so he went to the museum staff, and historians tried to figure out the answer to that question and develop this course. And Sheila Polk, who joined us, and I think everybody said hi to her, she was really instrumental in this course developing because she was invited by the Greater Jewish Foundation in Prescott to go back to DC to take the course that had evolved from that. And she described it as changing her life. So she came back from that wanting every cop and every prosecutor in Prescott to be able to take that course. And so they developed one because they couldn't send everyone back to DC. They developed one that they could do locally for that. And then with the help of Elizabeth Ortiz, who is the director of APAC, which is our state prosecutors association, have developed this course. They've trained about 20 of us as facilitators so that we can offer it to everybody in Arizona and eventually, hopefully, throughout the United States. So we give that little bit of history, give a little bit more of that, but we also use the opening slide to explain that we are not comparing police officers, prosecutors, law enforcement to Nazis. That the reason that we're going to show pictures of police officers in Nazi Germany is simply because the class is targeted towards law enforcement. They're images that we can all relate to. And so we really try to make the point that we are trying to learn from history, but not say that we are going down that road. And another important point that we make is there are lots of parallels between what we're going to look at and current events. In every class, somebody wants to bring up something about that's going on in the world. And especially now, if we were able to give this class with everything that's gone on in the last few months, people would want to talk about it. It's a 3.5-hour class, but we run out of time. So we gently encourage people to have those conversations after the class among themselves. It's a great discussion to have, but we don't want to bog down the class with those discussions. So we give that little background, and we always have a police officer and a prosecutor teaching the class. And in the best class are a mix of prosecutors and law enforcement to have the discussion. And so it's very heavily regimented between what I talk about and what Dave talks about. And Dave will be the first one to tell you I do the heavy lifting, but I give the introduction and then we turn it over to Dave to start the conversation with the class.
And the way that we start the conversation with the class is we ask them these two questions that you see on the screen. The first one being why they got into law enforcement, and then the next, what they view as their role. And everyone gives answers that we've heard before, but it's specific to them, and we ask them to remember those. We actually have those answers put up on the wall so that they can refer to them throughout the course. It really kind of gets things going. If we could, let's move to the next one. And what we do is we have 10 displays, and we talk about the museum and the things that can be seen there, but then we share with them pictures. Jason has one he'll show you in a minute. This is mine that I share with the class to talk about something that stuck out to me. And I share with them a little bit of the history behind this, but that the reason I picked this picture is because it shows that we are dehumanizing or de-individualizing people. And I share that I think that's how all the other things happen. And so after this, we invite them to go view these 10 displays that really kind of go through the crimes of the Holocaust from when Hitler comes into power until the end. And we invite them to pick something from those displays, whether it's an image or some verbiage that's on them that they want to share when they come back. And we start that discussion. Really, that's Jason's, where he really starts the heavy lifting.
And we also, before they get to the tour, there's a film that plays for them that defines the Holocaust. And one of the things that we find is that the education among certain groups on the Holocaust isn't as strong as we would like to see. So we give them a bunch of history, and the exhibits that Dave mentioned give them some history. And it's important to note that we partner with the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And so they're historians, and there's one in particular who works with us and comes out to Arizona and teaches us regularly. They are very much involved with this program. And again, I can't give enough credit to David Hess and Sheila Polk and Elizabeth Ortiz for helping build that partnership and really curate those exhibits. And so Dave, he goes through his picture, this one, and what it means to him. We come back, I talk about this picture and another one, and to this one stands out to me because it's Jews lined up at a police station in Austria trying to get the exit visas, and the whole system was rigged to take all of their possessions before they could get out of the country. And the reason that we talk about these images is we want this to be the process where they really start talking. And so we build in about 10 minutes for them to talk about a specific image or a fact or something they saw in either the movie or the exhibits that they can share. And we're getting them practiced in how they can start talking about the history. And the best facilitation is them talking and us just listening to them. And so that's what that part of the program is designed to do. After that, we have another film, and we pay attention to what they're saying. And the transition that we have to the next film is how, a lot of times they'll see these horrific pictures and they focus on the executions, the either bodies stacked up at some of these camps as they're liberated. And we try, they always ask, how did normal people get to the point where they could commit these atrocities? And we try to weave that into our next film because it talks about how Germany changed under Hitler to what we see in the periods of mass killings in 1942. And so after we watch that film, we then go back into the history and we start our discussion, which is the bulk of our discussion, which is about the slippery slope. And so what we're trying to do is show how German society and policing changed from 1933 to 1942. So in 10 short years, Germany goes from this period of being a democratic, industrialized, civilized country. And so we start by looking at pictures, and we don't have the first couple pictures we look at, but we start looking at it as a group. And so we have group discussions, and we have an image of Hitler and President Hindenburg standing next to each other. And we talk about why they would pose together when they didn't really like each other, and what Hitler gained by associating with von Hindenburg, what von Hindenburg gained by associating with Hitler. We talk about the Reichstag fire and how a member of the Communist Party burned down the Reichstag building, but how Hitler convinced Hindenburg that it was a communist conspiracy, and using that got Hindenburg to enact this Reichstag fire decree that took away a lot of their freedoms. And that how the German people at that time, their constitution was new. And we draw a parallel between their constitution and our constitution and what the reaction would be if our freedoms were taken away, but how the German people weren't really concerned about that. And we also draw a parallel between how taking away constitutional freedoms, and one of the ones that was taken away was, I don't know if you can read the fine print, was they suspended certain article or sections in the Constitution, including taking away the need for warrants for arrest or searches. And so we know that's our Fourth Amendment. Well, that was just suspended in Germany. And we obviously think that would be a horrible thing and no one would stand for it in America. But we start them thinking about how would that make their job as law enforcement officers, as prosecutors, easier. We then talk a little bit about the Enabling Act, which was a piece of legislation that allowed Hitler to enact his own laws. So in effect, Hitler becomes not only the executive branch, but the legislative branch. And he immediately, one of the exhibits that we have up, one of the poster boards, talks about some of the laws that were enacted using this Enabling Act. And so we start that discussion as a group. We want to make some really good points about how, just in a couple of short months after Hitler is appointed chancellor, the laws are changing and he's able to start enacting his policy that he knows is not popular, is not widely accepted among the German people, but he has this agenda to make it look as if Jewish people are born criminals. And so he's using these powers under the Reichstag Fire Decree and the Enabling Act to start using that propaganda to make the German people believe what he believes. So we do this group presentation, and then we break people up into 6 groups. We have 6 photos that we'll go through with them, and the ideal size is 6 groups of 6. We give them each an individual photo. It has history, either a page or 2 of a background about the photo. It has discussion questions, and then we also want them to start talking about what police function they're seeing in the photos and how the Nazis and Hitler are using that legitimate police function that they're seeing to enforce their agenda that I just talked about. So we spend a lot of time giving them a little bit of history before we just break them up and let them talk, usually about 15 or 20 minutes in a small group before we bring them back.
And when they come back, this is the first picture that they will see and that we'll talk about. And we invite the group that had this picture to share the history behind it, maybe some of the things that they talked about. But one of the things that we like to do is just ask the entire class, what do they see? What function do they see of policing that they recognize even today in the photo? And it always comes back, they recognize it's foot patrol and this police officer is patrolling the area. But we talk about some of the things that they see in this that also seem not quite right, even today, that make us uncomfortable. And if it's not obvious, real quick, I'll go over it. The gentleman on the left of the picture, he is the police officer, and the one on the right is a member of the SS. All right, and while he's got that white armband on his left arm, he is a member of the auxiliary police. So we talk about with the class, and we ask them, what they see and who looks in charge, and they always pick the officer because of the way that he's dressed. We discuss the importance of the way we present ourselves to the public, but we also talk about why the police would be okay working with this guy from the political party, and we talk about how the Nazis gave them money and raises and promotions and better equipment, and provided extra manpower to help them do their jobs, and we ask them how they feel about that, or would that be something they would appreciate. Then we ask, why would the Nazis want to be seen with this guy? And we talk about, the fact that the police officer is known in the area, and just their association with the police gives them this legitimacy of being with this person that the neighborhood trusts. Also, we talk about the fact that the Nazis really never completely replace the police, and they leave them in place the entire time because they're not cops. They don't know how to investigate crime, and it continues. Rapes, murders, robberies, all those things still continue, and the Nazis need the police. And we lead them through the discussion, and the class comes up with these points all on their own, just from looking at the picture and talking together. Let's go to the next one. This is the second image, and we talk about what we see here and what people think is normal, and they talk about that the officers are going to do this raid, so they're in tactical gear, and there looks to be a command and control structure, that it's not chaotic. It looks like what is being done is well regulated. But then we talk about what they see that isn't right. And they talk about often the numbers of police officers that are being used for this raid. And we go into a discussion of how that may change depending on the size of the department and what they're trying to do. The real thing we're trying to get to here, though, is that the Nazi Party is utilizing the police here to reinforce an image of Jews as criminals, because this street is known as a Jewish neighborhood. Around the corner from this street is the Communist Party headquarters, so they make that connection by doing this raid here. And we talk about how if someone happened to be walking by and looking down this street and seeing this happen, how they would automatically associate the people that live in this neighborhood as bad or criminals. And we talk about even today that when we see a police officer at maybe a neighbor's house, how automatically we have a visceral reaction to that, and we start making judgments about those people. And it's important for the class to come to that realization on their own, that now the police are being utilized to stigmatize a group.
So the next slide we have is actually not a picture, but we talk about in August of 1934 when Hindenburg dies, and Hitler, with the consent of the army, just consolidates the role of chancellor and president and just becomes the Fuhrer without even a vote. how he changes the oath of office for public servants. And so there's 3 oaths here. Under Hindenburg, under the Constitution, you swear loyalty to the Constitution. But under Hitler, he changes it to say, I swear I will be true and obedient to the Führer of the German Reich and people, Adolf Hitler. And we talk about how that, you know, in retrospect, that's a very big change, and people should see how significant that is. But, you know, in their history, it was traditional for them to swear an oath to a person, the Kaiser. And so this was more seen as going back to traditional values. And it wasn't a big deal. And already under the Nazis, policing had gotten better. You know, they were getting more support, they were getting more pay, they were getting more training, more equipment. And, you know, we talked about the Reichstag Fire Decree, where it was, they didn't have to do as much paperwork. They didn't have these limitations on what they could do. So it wasn't this red flag to them that the oath was changing. Instead, it was seen as going back to traditional values, but it's just one of those steps down the slippery slope that they have. And then we go to this image, and this is a couple. They're both German. The man is Jewish, the woman is not. Norden, Germany is a small town in rural Germany, and the SS has rounded up this couple, put the sign on the man, and are marching them to the police station. It's rare that police officers got involved, but this group of police officers did get involved before they got to the police station. And so we asked the question, you know, what should the police do when a couple is being publicly humiliated? It's important to point out that the Nuremberg laws that make it illegal for Jews and non-Jews to be in a relationship have not been enacted. Those won't be enacted until September of 1935. So there's nothing illegal about what's going on in this photo. And so we have a discussion about what should the police officers do. And the police officers obviously should protect this couple from the mob, that they should step in and stop this public humiliation from going on. But what we're seeing in this picture and what comes out is that the police aren't doing that. They don't seem to be concerned about the group behind them. Their backs are to the mob. They're not scared about what this group is going to do. And more importantly, they're not stopping the public humiliation. They haven't taken the sign off. So at the end of the day, what the police officers are doing in this photo is not enforcing the law. They're enforcing Nazi ideology. And the effect is, if you're Jewish in Northern Germany and you see this, are you going to go to the police for help if you're the victim of a crime? And when the law does change in September of 1935 to make this illegal, is there going to be any resistance in Northern Germany or anywhere else this happens? Or is this already the practice in those towns? And I know Sheila Polk and I have had discussions about this image. This is where people in the class really start to see the slippery slope and how things are changing and how the police officers are being used. So it's one of our favorite images, at least on the standpoint of having the discussion.
So we're going to try something here, and I'm going to ask the group to maybe share a couple of comments. So in this image, we have a specialist in criminal biology from Berlin who's come to talk to this woman. He's with a police officer. She's a Romani, and it's in a rural area. They're not really sure, sometime between 36 and 38. So I'm going to ask the group, maybe one or two people could share, do they recognize any normal police function being done by the officer in this image? Anybody see anything?
And if you did want to share, there you go. Ellen, you want to share something?
His presence should not even be there. All they needed was the police office, the criminal police. The only reason I think he's there is to make it more local. In other words, it's not just the government looking, it's also the police.
He was there.
Dave, you can't see this, but someone put in the chat, the officer has a stick in his hand.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's lots of reasons why we would look at this and go, that is not normal. But some of the things that we want the police officers in the class to recognize is the police are being asked to do things that they recognize as regular part of their jobs. They're being twisted, but they recognize it. So, for example, him as a police officer being there to assist another government agency, that happens today. We do standbys for child protective services. We do standbys for lots of different organizations so they can do their job. The comment about the stick, that comes up in every class. People want to know about that. The historians at the museum have said that they don't even know really what that is. It could be either a riding crop because he gets around on a horse, or it could be a stick that he's picked up and he's messing with. But it's interesting that every class, and including this group that we're talking with now, recognizes that that stick's a problem. Him having something in his hand in and of itself appears intimidating, right? Any other things that you might recognize as you look at this image? Maybe one or two more comments.
Well, first off, he gives credibility.
In what way?
Well, where we said there was no need for him there, by being there, you've now introduced a stronger view of this other guy who he's with. He's given the other guy credibility.
Right, his simple presence there, because people know him and they know his job, provides legitimacy to this guy who nobody knows from Berlin and what it is he's trying to do. Thank you. Anyone else? Maybe one more.
Don't be shy. Lauren, I think you have your wife listening in the same room. You could just lower your, yeah, one of you lower your speaker volume.
I'm questioning why they're there in the first place.
That's an excellent question. I mean, some of the speculation, because that comes up with officers as well, and they speculate, well, he knows the people in this area that the official from Berlin doesn't, and so he's actually guiding him to the people that he wants to talk to, the Romani or the Jewish folks in this area, so that he can collect this data he seeks. And one of the things that's important is what Jason mentioned in the beginning. Nazis had this view of crime that it was biological, that you were born a criminal based on your perceived race or perceived religion or perceived ethnic group. And we want to make sure that the officers recognize that the presence there provides legitimacy not only to what the Nazis are attempting to do, right, but it also furthers their goals in collecting data. So they're able to collect the data, but now the data, it's also okay to do that and to look at things that way just because he's there. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide is, and you can all read it, it's a deportation from Würzburg, Germany in 1942. As we look at the slide, we ask officers to try and find something that is normal here. And they talk about, well, I mean, it kind of looks like crowd control, maybe a big sporting event where officers are getting people to leave the area. And that's all true, right? We talk about even today, there are court orders to evict people from their homes. Officers do that today, right? But and then we go to what isn't normal about what's being depicted here. And they can pick out easily. We're moving an entire neighborhood of people. We're moving people from their homes simply based on their religion or their ethnic group. And we don't do that. It's a little tough to see online, but off to the left of the picture, there's a lady walking or someone riding a bike. And we often ask the group, right, why or what these people would think as they ride or they walk by about this group leaving. And amongst the answers, we remind them that up until this point, they have been being told that Jews are the enemy, that they are the criminals, and they're the cause of this war. And then they realize, well, maybe the people in the area aren't upset about the Jews being deported. They see benefit to it, right? And now, oh, well, these officers, they're seeing benefit to deporting these people because they're enemy aliens. We also talk about the final solution being a national secret. These officers most likely don't know exactly what is happening to these people. They know it's probably not good, but they don't know that they're necessarily headed to their deaths. And yet now they are a step in that process, right? They're enforcing this ideology. And it's important that we get that comment from them so that they make that connection.
So we then kind of talk about all of the images that we've seen and summarize that in all of those images, there is something that police are still doing today. So the first image we saw with the officer on patrol, every officer that we have in this training knows going on patrol. In the next one where they're going through the Jewish neighborhood, a lot of the officers have experience serving warrants or taking down a gang or being a part of a SWAT team where they shut down a neighborhood. That is a normal police function, even though the Nazis are using it for a different purpose. They're using it to associate that Jewish neighborhood with the Communist Party and crime. It's still something that police officers do as part of their job. The image of the public humiliation with the sign on the man, there is something that police officers do. They step in, they protect the couple. There's something they should have been doing there. It's something that police officers today would see as part of their job, but obviously the Nazis are using it for a different purpose. That slide with the Roma woman, where the officer is just standing by while the biologist from Berlin asks questions. Every officer in the room has done a civilian standby, whether it's with a census worker or child welfare. They have that job where they have to stand by while someone else from the government does their job. So obviously what the officer was doing, the purpose that the Nazis used it for was wrong, but it is a police function that we still do today. And even that last picture, I think Martin put in the comments, there's nothing normal here. Right, there's nothing normal in that photo, but crowd control is a function that police still do today. And everybody we teach has been at a Diamondbacks game and done crowd control or marched a crowd out of some public event. So they can see the parallel between them doing their job and what they see in the picture. And so we end that slippery slope discussion with any police officer from 1933 up until that last photo we saw could simply say, I was just doing my job. My job did not change from when the Nazis got into power till today. I'm still going on patrol, doing crowd control, citizen standby. And then we get to the final image that we show, and it's a graphic image, so I warn you, but we ask the question, what happens now? Now that the Nazis have come up with the final solution, that they are going to kill every Jewish person in Europe, and they are going to exterminate Jews, that's their final solution. They turn to police officers to participate in that. And now at the accumulation of the slippery slope, what happens when they ask police officers to participate in that? And so the final image that we show is this image of police officers shooting Jewish women outside the Michok ghetto in Eastern Poland. And it was veteran police officers who formed the core of these killing squads. And they'd round up Jewish people in Poland, often with the help of collaborators in Poland. And they'd strip them, they'd take all their belongings, they'd dig a ditch and execute them. And these police officers are going around, and anyone still breathing or moving is being shot again. And I'm not going to give you the long history that we give in the course, But ultimately, 80% of police officers who were asked to participate in this did. 20% agreed to pull the trigger, but 80% participated in some way or form. And the 20% who didn't, it's not like they stood up and said, this is wrong. They drank too much so that they couldn't help, or they got sick and asked for a transfer. So we end this lesson with the idea that if you go down the slippery slope, if you let yourself get away from the ideals you had when you joined the police force, obviously the people in the room aren't going to perpetrate this, but who knows where it's going to end.
So after this discussion, we share a video, and in the video, this statement is said by the chief prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials from the United States, Robert Jackson. The crimes which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating, the civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated. And immediately we ask the class, what lessons from our discussion, from the videos they've seen, from the images, what lessons they could take for themselves to ensure that they don't go down a slippery slope, right, in their own careers, so that they maintain the values that they had when they got into the job. And we list them. Jason writes them or types them out on the computer, or they go on the board. Each class develops their own set of lessons for themselves. Some examples are, not following orders that you know are illegal, of standing up for what's right, being willing to be the one person in the crowd that will not go along. And the lessons, I just give those as examples because they are different for each class. And at least for me, that's one of the things that makes this class so incredible, is the ability to facilitate this discussion that leads to mental evaluation of how individuals can ensure that they do the right thing. That, to me, is the big thing.
And it's such a credit to Sheila Polk and David Hess and Doug Bartosh, who was the cop who taught with Sheila when they originated this course, is when we're asking them, what do you do to make sure you don't get away from the values, they're staring at their values. So remember at the beginning of the class when they wrote out why they became a police officer, those are all up on the board and they're just staring at their own words. And so after we do the lessons, we have a short wrap-up ceremony. And remember the other question we asked them at the very beginning was what they view as their role in the community. And so they're also staring at those answers. And they usually write things such as being a guardian, being a protector, to protect victims, to protect the weak, things like that. And those are great answers, but we end up telling a story. And I'm not going to tell the story now because we're already running a little bit late and we want to leave time for questions from everybody. But we tell the story of Gerda Weissman Klein. And I'm sure many of you either know her, she lives in Scottsdale, but she's a Holocaust survivor who's written a couple of excellent books on her experience, but also created some foundations. And she lectured at a gathering of prosecutors, judges, law enforcement leaders. And we start talking about how their role is to really protect the Constitution and protect people in this country more than just being a guardian. And so that we circle back to why we call this What You Do Matters. And we leave them with the notion that they have to do a perfect job, that they have to be perfect every time. And usually one of the lessons they've come up with is not only to protect victims, but to treat the criminals or defendants or suspects that they deal with as people, that they're human beings. And we can circle back and draw that lesson with them. So that's the presentation. We went about 35 minutes or 40 minutes, so a few minutes longer than we meant to, but we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
First of all, thank you both very much. And thank you, Sheila, you're hiding behind your picture, but I know how much, anytime I've mentioned in the last month that this is coming up, a number of people who are Prescott residents have talked so highly about Sheila and of course about this course. So thank you for jumping on today as well. And if you do have a question, please do unmute your mic or use the chat. Both of them will work. There you go. Anyone who has a question, don't be shy.
Oh, I had a question. I just wondered, was after the war, were there any police officers that maybe told their story as to why they contributed during this time? Did they not feel remorse or feeling like their values, that they went against why they became a police officer? And yeah.
So I'll talk a little bit about it. Jason really has a lot more in depth into this topic, but there's a particular book that kind of illustrates what you're asking. It's called Ordinary Men, and it's a book that delves into a police battalion and the reasons for why they did what they did. And it's interesting that what they found is they kind of disassociated their actions. And it was another interesting part of that is something that Jason said. It illustrates that nothing was going to happen to these officers if they refused to participate. The 20% that refused, they weren't killed. They weren't put into camps. They were just reassigned to other jobs. They got the same raises. They got the same promotions as the people who participate, right? It was a decision to participate.
Thank you. Alan, I saw you wanted to ask a question. I muted you though. There you go.
Yeah.
Before you ask the question, Alan, I did put the name of the book and the author in the chat if anybody's interested in reading that book.
Thank you. I've heard other presentations like this, and thank you so much for everything you guys are doing. I guess my question is, do you believe this can happen again? And I'm not necessarily talking about happen to Jews, but could it happen again in the United States in a situation where there's a major depression and people blame one race or one religion or one group for the problems? And as we all know, Germany was in the 1930s, in the late 20s and the early 30s, was a very democratic and industrious country, and we saw what happened. So could it happen again?
I think I'm going to get, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I think I'm going to get in trouble from Sheila if I answer that question. Because as I said at the beginning, these questions come up all the time when we teach this course. And I wish I could give you an answer in the 15 minutes we have left that answers that. But that's really what we want you to take from this. We want you to have that discussion with yourselves. We want you to take from this course those discussions, but it's not for us to answer that during this course or after this course.
And this is Sheila. Can I jump in too?
Please do.
Please.
Okay. First of all, Jason, there is nothing you could ever do that would get you in trouble with me. You walk on water, and that was a wonderful presentation by both you and Dave. I want to go back to that question, though, just to make the comment that one of the takeaways from this training that I love is for everyone to understand how fragile democracy really is. I think when times are good, we all tend to get complacent. And then when times are stressed, then we start to see signs of a slippery slope. So, I can't answer that question either. But one of the great things about this class is light bulbs go off with our students in ways that we never even imagine. And we know that when they leave the classroom, they start having these conversations that they probably wouldn't have otherwise. I have several personal experiences just within my own office with prosecutors discussing issues. I had one example where I was just happened to be walking down a hallway, and inside one of the offices of one of my prosecutors, they were having a conversation, and I they couldn't see me yet. I was not eavesdropping, by the way. I was just walking down the hallway, but I heard them say the word Holocaust. And so I stopped and then I eavesdropped, but they were having a conversation about an issue in a criminal case. And they were talking about it in the context of the Holocaust in the class they had taken, and the issue of our greater responsibility to uphold the Constitution and the rights of everybody. Those are conversations that simply would not happen, I don't think, without this course. And I know those conversations happen among law enforcement and among all of our students. So, you know, I won't answer that question either, but I do think for everybody, it makes us realize how fragile democracy really is and what our role is, each one of us, what our role is in working to preserve that democracy.
Thank you. There is a question in the chat that I'll just read out. How many prospective officers have been weeded out because they were seen as psychologically unfit by their responses to this course?
Well, I'll take that one just as the police officer. We don't do anything with the responses. I mean, I should say that we haven't had any comments that have been so outside of the bounds of normalcy that it has raised the need to call an agency and say, hey, you've got to look at somebody. I will say, though, that before someone becomes a police officer, there is a psychological battery of tests that they have to go through. And there are people that have been weeded out due to that. So there isn't anything specifically in this course that we would use to classify someone and have them removed. We really just try to start conversations.
Thank you. And here's another question from the chat, which is it fair to say that the police did not have a choice in these situations? And I know that you'd probably be best to address, including peer pressure and the, I guess, the one person who goes against the supervisor type of a feeling, but you can address that question.
I'll take that one, Dave.
Yeah,
Sure.
Jason,
So let's start with the oath. So Hitler changes the oath of office and makes everybody swear it. So there was no pressure on people to swear the oath other than the internal pressure of what happens if I don't. They wouldn't be thrown into jail. They wouldn't be prosecuted. They certainly would not be executed for failing to swear the oath. They would simply lose their job. And so we have studies of one person, at least one person, who refused to swear the oath, but other than losing their job, there were no other consequences to it. When you get to that final image and the 80-20%, they did have a choice. People were not executed for failure to go along. People were transferred out of that situation. So the pressure was internal. It wasn't external, do this or else.
Oh, thank you. And then a question that was written privately. How do you sort of view from this perspective the connection to the officers who did not react necessarily the way people would have liked them to react with the George Floyd story? And then another question I have afterwards privately.
I will say that that's another one of those current event things. And we really don't want to answer that. We want people to come to, and when I say people, we want prosecutors and police officers to come to those realizations on their own. For this course, it's really important. Every facilitator tries not to be the one that tells people how they should think or feel. We want them to make those connections. We want them to come to those realizations on their own from the material and from the discussions, so that they would look at something like what happened with George Floyd or any other of the situations that have been highlighted and make the connection that they need to do the right thing in those situations and come to that on their own through the course.
And I'll tell you that one of the most rewarding things for this class, when we ask people the intro questions, what do you view as your role in the community? Sometimes we get these veterans, whether they're prosecutors or police officers, who you can tell things have gotten to them, that the job has gotten to them, and that maybe they've gotten away from their ideals. And so they'll write things like, refereeing criminals or something like that. And then by the end of the class, they come up and say, you know what, I get it. I see why I need to take a step back and get back to my original ideals. So you can see people who have kind of gone down that path pull back at the end of the course.
That's actually really interesting. Here's another private question. Maybe it's going to be more for Dave. Are the pre-hire tests repeated at particular intervals, 5 years, 10 years, etc., to determine whether officers' value systems regarding responsibilities have changed?
They are not. In Arizona, we'll just stick with Arizona. There's the Arizona Post, which set the standards for police officers, and there is no requirement for an agency to go back and conduct those tests or any of those assessments. There's all sorts of things that are being done now in the current climate. People are suggesting, but currently there is no requirement that that be done. No.
But maybe just since, from my little knowledge, if you as a supervisor would know of something, it would be a requirement, meaning there is sort of a checks and balances to a degree.
There is, in that, as a police supervisor, if I see someone that's obviously having issues, I can go through a process to have an evaluation done, but there's no set requirement like they were asking, like every 5, every 10, every 15 years.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Is there something about driving records? Isn't there something like that they rerun the certain records for criminal things?
Oh, every year at least in Phoenix, every year at your yearly evaluation, your driving record is checked, your criminal history is rerun, that type of thing is done. But a psychological evaluation at a specific period, that's not required.
Okay, thank you. And then I saw Lou, Rich, you had a question?
I was having the same question about, it entered my mind to repeat that, excuse me, to repeat that test. And with the things that have gone on recently, an officer could have, his mind could get twisted a little bit to what he originally believed were the right things. And a psychological evaluation might pop some of that. Right.
I think, Lou, you're probably going to have to take that up with city governments to sort of change their own legislation.
Okay. Well, let me address that from a different point of view. I agree. That's something beyond the purview of this course. But one of the lessons that we hear consistently is if you see something, say something. And I think Sheila agrees with me. My outlook has changed. And so before if you see someone else doing something wrong in your office, you might say that doesn't concern me. I think a lot of people who take this class come away thinking, if I see someone doing something wrong, if I don't say something, if I don't speak up, then I'm just as complicit in what they're doing. And so I think a lot of people come out of this course with the notion, not only do I have to worry about me, but I have to be someone who will speak up if I see someone else doing something wrong.
If I could, I'll share a real quick story that I haven't shared yet that has been brought to me recently. I spent a long time as an internal affairs investigator, and a few weeks ago I had an officer that used to work for me 15, 16 years ago when I was a sergeant. He came up to me and we met at some event, and he said, hey, I actually went over to professional standards, which is our version of internal affairs, because of something this guy did, but also because of your class. He said, I remembered the lessons that we came up with in class when I saw this happen, and I knew that I could not let it go. The class has a real and a tangible effect on people. I know it's easy for me to say that. I'm one of the facilitators. I love the class, but I have that experience. It does work.
Thank you. Stan Nitsky, I see you had a question.
I had a question, but it wasn't specifically to the class. My question is, when you have situations like what happened with Floyd and others like that, or when somebody is running away in a situation where it's a traffic ticket and gets shot by a police officer, I want to know why they don't aim for the legs. I mean, maybe it's my mental attitude. I mean, it's not somebody committed a murder and you're trying to stop a murderer. You're trying to stop somebody who's running from a ticket, or maybe who's going speeding too fast or something like that. What is the reason for people getting killed in a situation like that as opposed to being wounded? Or is the aim that bad? I mean, I figure you have enough training, you should be able to shoot straight.
Okay, I'll take a minute. I'm also a state certified firearms instructor, so I'll give you that one. Here's the deal. The reality is we're trained to shoot center of mass because it's hard to hit those legs and arms that are flying around. And frankly, depending on how you view things, that's where all of the stuff is that God put that keeps you alive, unfortunately. But that's the biggest area to shoot at, and we're trained to shoot at center of mass. That's why.
Do you think it's right? It's just, I mean,
now you're asking me an existential question.
I guess, because I'm looking at it from the point of view, I understand that you're aiming for the body if somebody is really, you saw somebody stab somebody or something running, but if somebody is stopped for a ticket and gets out of his car and runs, you know, and it's basically for a ticket, or you see somebody running through a neighborhood and he looks suspicious and gets shot, why is it that nobody aims for the legs, even if it takes 8 shots to hit the legs?
Well, number one, if someone gets shot at for just running through a neighborhood, there are other issues that we're going to have to address. But number two, we're not trained to shoot for the arms or the legs. We're trained to shoot center of mass, because when we shoot, it's supposed to be for specific reasons. And I can't comment on what has happened in other agencies. All I can tell you is that's the training that officers receive.
There's a second question here.
Well, hold on. Before we sidetrack to police shootings, I think to stay on topic, and I have Andrea Sylvie is,
yes.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I was just wondering if I'm a nurse by background, and we of course have continuing education requirements in order to maintain our licensure, as do a lot of other professions. And I was wondering if police officers have continuing education requirements.
We do. We do.
And
in
so
fact, this class meets some of that continuing education requirements. Jason, I think, mentioned earlier, it also meets the county attorney or the prosecutor continuing education requirements, and he would be able to speak more to that than I would.
yes. Oh, he did mention that. I was wondering specifically about the police officers, and how much continuing education and how often does it need to be renewed?
16 hours a year is the minimum requirement. I can only speak for the city of Phoenix in that we require a great deal more than that, but the state mandate is a minimum of 16 hours per year.
Okay. And just one final follow-up on that. So this class would be accredited for like how many hours of continuing education?
3.5.
Okay, thank you very much. Excellent class. I really, really learned a lot. Thank you.
And just a follow-up to that question, because again, message privately, is this class required or just available?
Jason, why don't you handle that one? You've got a really good view on that.
It's available. It's not required, although some agencies do require it of their people. We do not have it required at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, but we encourage at least all of our supervisors to go, but everybody to take it.
Okay, thank you. And then someone asked, who was that?
Me?
Go for it, Lauren.
Okay. I just want to make comment of the fact that actually we have taken this course. We were at the Biltmore when this course was taught. This course is so invaluable, it's unbelievable. We really appreciate the police officers that have gone to it, as well as those who are teaching this course. And the whole key on everything is called education. I wish they had a similar type of course that they did in the high schools. You can see from the general public and what's going on so much of this is they have no education, they don't have a background, they don't know what socialism is. It's unreal. But that's why this course is invaluable, and the fact that the police officers are taking it and teaching it is greatly appreciated.
Jason, follow up to that question. What is precluding it from being mandatory?
So I don't think for lawyers, I don't think that there are any mandatory courses in Arizona. There's there's a professionalism course when you first become an attorney, but the state bar doesn't mandate anything. One of the issues with making something mandatory is people don't want to be there. And so we'd rather get word of mouth and people encouraging to go. And I don't have the statistics in front of me, but one of the things with David Hess being involved is he loves doing a statistical analysis. And we follow up with people a year after they take the course. We send a survey as soon as they've taken the course and one a year later. And we find that people generally feel that this really speaks to their profession. And even a year later, there's a large number who feel like the lessons they got were valuable. So we've gone to some agencies where they have made it mandatory for their officers, and they've been tough classes. They've been among the toughest that we've had to teach. And it's a lot better when we get a mix from different agencies, prosecutors and cops in the same room, and have a much better discussion.
Thank you. And this is just a question from earlier in the chat. What is done? I guess this goes back to they were talking about are there follow-up psych evals and things like that? What is done to see if an applicant has a bad past from other police departments where they might have worked? I guess that's for Dave.
I will tell you, I don't have an intimate knowledge of how the process works, but I know that information is shared through Arizona Post about previous applicants, and that agencies work together to see if someone has applied in the past. But I've never worked in our Employment Services Bureau, so I can't speak to the specific process.
Okay, thank you. And then Marty, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to ask a question?
No.
Okay, so then I'll meet you. All right, any last questions? I know we've taken a lot of your time, which we really appreciate as well. Phyllis, you want to say something?
Prior to the development of this class, were there or are there ethics courses taught at the police academies that are in any way directed somewhat like this, or is this really a brand new, wonderful concept in the way that it's taught?
Yes, there are ethics classes. But what Jason said in the beginning, I will reemphasize. This class is completely different because we don't tell you as a participant in the class what you learned. We don't tell you what you should take away from it. We lead you, we help facilitate discussions and ideas to get you to the lessons yourself. That's why this class is different. We just find that it's so much more valuable for the students to make the realizations and the connections on their own. When you start telling somebody what they ought to do, seems like they turn themselves off. When they make the realization on their own, like Jason has said before, the light bulb comes on, and we've seen it in the class. That's why this is different.
Okay, and then Jason, did you get a private question?
Yes, I've gotten a couple. I was responding to Pinky about giving this presentation for other people. I'm going to send her my email address so we can follow up with that afterwards. And then Sherry wanted me to speak a little bit more about the shooting. And I'm not a police officer. I can't speak to what they're trained to do very much, but I will say that they should only use lethal force, at least I can speak to Arizona law, only when it is necessary to protect someone else, themselves or someone else from lethal force. So in Arizona, people would not be shooting someone running away from the police unless that person was armed and was running into a group of people. So we wouldn't shoot to wound somebody. In those circumstances, they wouldn't shoot at all. I think police officers are trained only to fire when lethal force is immediately necessary to stop a threat. And there's a lot of training, and I think Dave's probably gone through a lot of it, on de-escalation and using non-lethal force, such as a taser, to stop the use of lethal force.
Let me encourage anyone listening to reach out to their local police departments. I know during the current COVID situation, it's not happening, but agencies put on citizen police academies where they talk about the training that they go through, where they talk about their policies. And it really is an educational thing, and it's enlightening to kind of see what your local police agencies are going through for their training.
And I'm gonna add to that, because the Phoenix Police Department, which has done it, has also done community days where the Citizens Police Academy might be an 8-week, every Thursday evening type of a course, which might be a little bit difficult for many of us to commit to, just driving in the evening and things that are involved with that. But they have done community-based ones where they took a single day and tried to cram in as much information. And I'm happy to work on that once we get back to normal life. To do one specifically for older adults, which would be really interesting. I can work on that. Any other questions? I see Lou, you're still unmuted.
I may have, because I was a couple minutes late at the beginning. Where was this originally created, and how long has it been being used?
So it started with the chief of police for the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. in 1998, asking the question, what was the police officer's role and why did they allow the Holocaust to happen? And Sheila Polk was invited to take the course that question spawned. And I believe it was 2005 that she went back and took that course. She came back, and with the help of the Jewish Foundation of Greater Prescott and Doug Bartosh, developed a course in Prescott that was taught to every prosecutor and law enforcement officer in Prescott before they started making it available to every law enforcement officer and prosecutor in Arizona. And I think it was 2014 when Dave and I were among a group that became trained to be facilitators of the course.
Okay, and now we kept on pushing off Herb Kadoff. If you want to ask your question.
My question was answered. This bit about lethal force and non-lethal force was what I was going to ask about. In other words, I was saying, if a guy's running away from a ticket, lethal force doesn't seem to be exactly what you ought to use. I mean, you can tell from his license plate who the heck he is, and you'll get him later. So it's really not a reason to shoot at him. And I can understand not being able to hit his legs, because there were days many, many years ago when I tried to shoot things and I found out it was more difficult to shoot at small things than large.
Can I jump in on a comment here? Because I don't think anyone over here really believes that people are shot at for speeding. I think it's usually when you've done something after being pulled over. And anyone who believes differently, then we really have a problem. So just putting that out there. And I don't speak for the police department, but as a citizen of the United States who believes in our police departments and laws. On that note, thank you both very much. If anyone does have follow-up questions that weren't answered, please do send me an email. I'll make sure to forward to Jason and to Dave and get those questions answered. If you missed the beginning, this is recorded. And as long as Dave and Jason allow me to leave it up on our Facebook page, we'll do that. If not, it'll be private and I can share it privately. So again, thank you all for joining today. Thank you, Lieutenant Dave and Deputy Attorney Jason, for this fascinating presentation. I know how many of us appreciate it, and I can only imagine what good it does in the departments that are taught it. So thank you. Before I officially move to schmoozing, as we call it, I just wanted to share some of the upcoming events for next week. So for those of you who are familiar with the Jewish Federation, they have an arm that they've done called SCAN, Secure Community Network, which provides a lot of help to communities in the sense of better protecting themselves. So the director of SCAN, his name is Brad Orsini, will be sharing a presentation on what does the security of our Jewish community look like nationally and how to build a resilient community. That's on Monday. On Wednesday, we have a ventriloquist, so some light fun. On Friday, we have Practicing Safe Internet by Izzy Lifshitz, which is just helpful tips that to keep you safe, including simple things like recognizing an email is phishing. That's a PH. That is somebody who is looking like something else, and it's a way for people to get your passwords and other secure and safe data that you don't want them to have. And on Sunday evening, July 26th, there is a lecture called The Archaeological Claim to Jerusalem. That is going to be on a totally different Zoom, but look out for the email on Sunday. We'll have links to all of this. Again, thank you, Lieutenant Moore and County Attorney Jason. This was fascinating. And I've gotten so many comments, you can look at them as well, of thanks for what you both do. So thank you. And thank you to Sheila Polk for everything you've done to get this actually out there and creating this course. Thank you.